I'll never forget one of the first days in my plant pathology course in college when we took a cigarette, sliced it open, rubbed that dry tobacco onto our fingers, and then went over and touched a tomato plant. So what we were trying to do is see if we could transmit a virus that was sometimes in tobacco onto a tomato. Now, as the year progressed, we started to see those viral symptoms show up in the tomato. And this was really inspirational for me because I realized that, how easy you could transmit virus, something from like a dried tobacco in a cigarette, which seems so just dry and dead, still has the ability to cause a disease in a tomato plant. So plant diseases can be really interesting and really complex, just like insect life cycles that we already talked about. But diseases can take all sorts of different forms and cause all different types of symptoms in our plants. Thank you so much for watching this video series all about pest management and disease management. I really hope that you're enjoying it. I just wanted to let you know that this series is actually just a really small section of a much broader course all about gardening. Everything from, how to select seeds and planting seeds all the way up to harvest and kind of just everything in between. And so if this sounds like something you're interested in and really broadening your understanding in gardening, I'm going to place a link below in the description, and this will bring you to the Wild Abundance Gardening School in North Carolina. And we have a sliding scale payment system for the whole course, so you can pay what you can afford in order to have access to this wealth of knowledge. Now, in your garden, the key to understanding diseases and how they develop and cause problems for you is to start with this disease triangle. Now, I really like the disease triangle because it gets you thinking about more things than just what you're seeing. So the disease triangle has 3 sides, and you have to have all 3 sides in order to actually get that disease. So the sides of the triangle are pathogens, environment, and then the host or the plant. Now, these all add up to the amount of disease that you're going to see. So that would be the middle of the triangle. You may be thinking that if we're going to be talking about diseases, we're going to start with the pathogen or the thing that is actually causing the problem. But actually where I like to start is talking with the environmental side of the disease triangle. And that is because pathogens are all very environmentally dependent. Just like insects, they're incredibly dependent on that temperature. If it's too hot or too cold, they reproduce really slowly. They don't expand fast. And so this is something that we keep in mind when we're trying to control these diseases is what temperature it is, how wet it is. Many diseases need a certain amount of humidity or raindrops. For instance, some diseases will transmit with raindrops. So you need a raindrop to actually spread the disease. As the raindrop hits it, it kind of aerosols it up, and then those land on your plant and cause the disease. So focusing on the environment first rather than the pathogen helps you kind of understand those environmental conditions and how they could favor a disease problem. Environment is also important because if you think of all these pathogens as very tiny cells, well, they're very susceptible to things like UV light or to dry air. Those little tiny cells, if they're subjected to the power of the sun, they're way more likely to die. So this is why often you see, in a moist, kind of dark environment, you'll see mold grow because it's not subjected to the sun, it's not drying out, and it can really just proliferate and take over, that piece of bread that you have in the back of your cabinet or something like that. So the second part of this disease triangle is the host. Now the host is just the plant that you don't want to get the disease. And the way that I think about this in relationship to a disease or pathogen is think of yourself. If you lived in a really dank, dark, and cold basement, and you didn't have any blankets, and you never saw the sunlight, you weren't eating good food, you would probably get sick really easily. Now take your same person, move to the coast, you've got delicious, nutritious food all the time, good airflow, you sit out in the sun. I mean, the chances that you get sick are much lower than if you're living in that basement. So take this principle and apply it to your garden, and the same thing could happen with plants. If you have a plant that's in a condition that kind of favors that disease, well, they're going to get the disease much easier than if you kind of change up that condition where the plant is, and then you're less likely to get that disease. By changing the condition, the host is a much healthier plant that is able to resist different diseases and kind of fend off these negative pathogens that would otherwise cause a disease. A lot of the other presenters have talked about how to keep your plants healthy through soil or fertility and watering, but this is also really important for disease management. Keeping that plant happy is also going to help keep it disease-free. So making sure you're not overwatering or underwatering, making sure that you're fertilizing appropriately, or using fertilizers that don't just shock your plants with a ton of fertilizer at one time. Kind of a slower release fertilizer can really help fight off diseases, because that plant is going to be happy and healthy and not struggling to get by, which allows the pathogens to get in. And the last part of making the host less susceptible to these pathogens is actually choosing which plant you're planting. So when you're choosing out seeds in your catalog or online, you might see a little section on there that says disease susceptibility, and it'll sometimes give little codes, there'll be a V or like an SV or something like that. So those are all these properties that have been bred into the plant in order to resist certain diseases. So, if you knew you had a problem with verticillium wilt or something like that, you might want to try and get a plant that's resistant to that pathogen. When selecting the seed and looking at this disease resistance chart, it's important to actually know what diseases you might have if you're going to try and choose something that's resistant to it. There's no sense in buying a tomato that's resistant to a pathogen that you don't actually have in your garden or not isn't around. So this leads perfectly into that third part of the disease triangle, which is pathogens. Now, pathogens, it's not important to know every single thing about every pathogen. You would just be bogged down and it would spend way too time. But it is important to know the different types of pathogens so that you can more accurately diagnose what your problem is. So this next video is going to cover the 4 types of pathogens, and it's just going to be an overview, and it might also help you with, other parts of your life. Like right now I'm filming this and we're in a global pandemic. So it's all based on one little virus. So if you learn a little bit more about these pathogens, it's going to help in other parts of your life.